In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to attack a king that has not castled. We're going to be looking at common tactical motifs as well as ideas to keep the king stuck in the center of the board. Timestamps are in the description. Enjoy the video. First things first, you have to realize that you cannot force an attack on your opponent's king if your opponent develops appropriately and gets his pieces out. There are a lot of variations in chess where you are unable to attack your opponent's king even though your opponent has his king in the center of the board. For example, in the Sicilian defense, there are plenty of lines where the king stays in the center. Let me show you one such example. This right here is called the Najdorf variation of the Sicilian after a6, and from here there are many different lines. Let's just say bishop to e3, e5, knight goes back. Both sides are just simply developing here, and black plays this move h5 in order to stop an early pawn storm on the king side by white. So black plays this move in order to control this g4 square. The black king remains in the center of the board, and it is very, very safe there. Why is it safe there? That is because you are simply unable to open up the center of the board, and you're unable to get to this king. The e-file is completely closed. There are two pawns in the way, and there are so many pieces. After knight b to d7, there are 4 pieces in front of the black king. It is very difficult to get to a king when there are 4 minor pieces in front of him, 2 knights and 2 bishops. Nobody's touching this king. The queen is also on d8, and you just simply cannot get to this king. It is way too well defended. So in a position like this, what would happen is that king to b1 would be played, rook to c8, and what do you do here? You can try an idea like f4. However, this doesn't do anything because after b5, if you capture on e5, black just simply captures back, and once again you haven't accomplished anything with this exchange. The only thing that's gone is the weak d6 pawn for black, and the black bishop opened up, and this is very good for the black pieces. White is not doing well here at all. So in order for you to get to your opponent's king when your opponent's king is in the center, there are a couple of conditions that have to be met. So let's talk about those conditions right now. The number one most important factor that determines whether the king is safe in the center of the board or not is whether the e-file is open. In this case, it is, and in cases when e-file is open, the king is in danger if it is still in the center of the board. So in a position like this, queen to e2 is the best move. After queen e2, we are disallowing the black king to castle, because if black castles, we would win the knight on e7. So black cannot castle here. What black has to do is deal with this pin by moving the king to f8. We're also threatening moves like d5. So for example, if anything else were to be played, let's say a move like queen d7, we can go d5 and then take on d5, and this is completely winning because queen takes d5, there's queen takes e7, which is checkmate. So this is a very powerful move that black has to keep in mind, and black has to act fast. That's why king to f8 in this position has to be played, and after a move like rook a to d1, still threatening d5, black stops this d5 push by playing this move, knight to d5, and after captures, pawn captures, we get into a position like this. Now there's another very important principle that you have to remember when you're attacking. This is not necessarily exclusive to attacks where the king is in the center. It can happen in many other cases as well, but what you want to do is transform your attack into a winning endgame. For example, in this position, queen to e5 is a very powerful move. It puts pressure on the queen on d6, it puts pressure on the pawn. If the queen is accepted, this pawn is under attack, it has to be defended, but then we go in on the 7th rank, attacking everybody over here, and very soon we're going to put the second rook on the 7th rank, and this is going to be devastating while black struggles to develop and get his final rook into the game. If this black rook was here on e8, at least it would be active, but in a position like this, it's not, and this is creating lots of problems for the black pieces, and this is why this position is completely lost for black, because after a move like g6, trying to go king g7 and bring the rook out, we can just go rook to e7, nobody can guard f7, nobody can guard b7, and black just simply loses here. So make sure to transform your attacks into winning endgames. Another very important idea that you have to remember is to keep the king in the center, and the fact that bishops are very powerful when it comes to keeping the king in the center if they cut off the diagonals. So for example, in this position, we can play this move bishop to a6, and what this move accomplishes is that it cuts off this entire diagonal. It controls the f1 square, and the king cannot castle through a check. That is a rule in chess. You cannot castle through a check, and therefore this king is stuck in the center. Now, if you are very, very sharp, instead of bishop to a6, you have an alternative move, pawn to e3. After pawn to e3, you're attacking the knight, you're also attacking the pawn. The pawn has to be taken, and after bishop takes, you're cutting the king off once again, and you're disallowing it to castle once again by using this bishop instead of with this bishop on c8. But another benefit of playing the move e3 over here is that it opens up the e-file. So in addition to keeping the king in the center, you're also opening up the e-file and allowing your rook to be developed to e8 with potential checks on e1 and a devastating attack on the white king. Now I want to ask you a question. What is the most vulnerable square in your opponent's position? That is the pawn on f7. This is the most vulnerable pawn in black's camp because it's only defended by the king, and it is the most vulnerable pawn in a lot of openings. So in a position like this, what we can play is this move pawn to c3. This move has two ideas in mind. If the pawn is taken, we can develop our knight with the tempo, but also we don't have to do that right away. What we can do is play this move queen to b3, once again coming with the tempo, attacking this pawn on f7. This is a very dangerous idea. Let's say black defends it, we can go knight takes c3. We can take on c3 right now, and let's say our opponent tries to go for this bishop right here. It is a very powerful bishop, so it makes sense to play a move like knight a5. It doesn't matter, we go queen b4, captures, and here our opponent, seeing that our rook is on e1 and the e-file is about to open up, he castles queenside. However, just because our opponent castled does not mean that the attack is over. Our attack continues here. We can play this move knight to d5. We're attacking the queen. We're also threatening checkmate. The knight has to be captured, and after pawn captures, queen f6, and here we can play this move bishop to g5, skewering the queen and winning the rook on d8. Let's say black captures this pawn. That's not a good decision because we take the rook and then we bring our rook to c1, attacking c7, and then we bring our rook to b1, attacking the queen on b6, and then we can take on b7, and we still have a devastating attack. So first of all, what we did here was that let's go back right over here, we attacked this pawn on f7, which was very, very vulnerable. We forced out a response by black, and then we were able to create a huge attack over here. And even though in this position our opponent got out of the center of the board just in time, it wasn't just in time, it was too late, and we still managed to attack our opponents. You're going to be in a lot of situations where your opponent will castle last second, and that doesn't necessarily mean that the attack is over. You can still continue the attack if you're precise and if you keep up the pressure. You can win many games just like that. Sometimes you can sacrifice material in order to force your opponent's king to remain in the center of the board or out in the open. So in this position, last move played by black was queen c7, attacking our bishop. We have a couple of options. We can retreat to b3, we can retreat to d3. However, why do any of those when we can simply capture on e6? After f captures on e6, we take with the knight, attacking the queen, attacking this pawn on g7. We're winning the pawn on g7 here. Let's say queen to a5 is played, we take g7, and then we drop back to f5. Of course, we don't want to lose the knight. Let's say knight to c5 is played. Black is trying to get some activity, open up his pieces. It doesn't matter. We take on f6, and then we go queen to h5. And here in this position, we have a devastating attack. Our opponent is struggling to defend against the queen and the knight, which is a very, very lethal combination. After a move like king to f7, we can take on d6, and then we can play this move e5, and once again we have a devastating attack here, and there's not anything our opponent can do about it in a position like this, because his king was out in the open. He neglected to defend his e6 pawn. Let me just go back right over here. He neglected to defend this pawn, and he paid the price for it, because we have this pawn sacrifice and we are forcing our opponent to remain in the center of the board. And even though we're giving up material, we gave up a whole piece, it doesn't really matter, because our opponent's rooks are not developed and they're not necessarily in the game. So black is playing without 10 points of material while we are checkmating this king on f7, or if we're not checkmating, we're definitely winning a lot of material back. Even if we don't win the piece back, at the very least we're winning all of the pawns back, and this is going to be a winning position for the white pieces. Another very common motif to force your opponent's kings to remain in the center of the board is to attack the pawn on g7. Now in this case we cannot attack it right away, because if we went queen g4 we would simply lose our queen. However, we can play this move e5, forcing this knight to move away, and then we can go queen to g4. After queen g4 we are attacking this pawn on g7, and it is very difficult to defend it. You cannot just simply castle here as the black pieces, because bishop to h6 comes and you're going to be losing a lot of material here. We don't even want to take this rook. We can take this rook, and we're going to be better here anyways, because we're going to be up in exchange, but this bishop is so valuable that we can even continue here with moves like knight to f3, h4, h5, and continue our attack. So by playing this move queen to g4 and attacking this pawn on g7, putting pressure on it, our opponent's king is forced to remain in the center of the board. Black has a couple of options here to try to defend this pawn on g7, however, all of them are very uncomfortable. If you go king to f8, you're not castling anymore, and you're going to struggle to develop this rook. If you go g6, now you're gonna run into bishop h6, now you're not castling at all, so your king will still remain in the center of the board while white finishes development and strikes in the center. So whatever you do with the black pieces, you're struggling to develop, and you're struggling to get your king out of the center of the board, and this king is going to be in a lot of trouble once white finishes development and decides to open up the center of the board. You're not going to be checkmating this king right away, but by keeping it in the center, you're making it a target. You can attack it once you get all of your pieces out into the game where they are very, very active. Now I will give you a small exercise in order to improve your attacking skills. So in this position, let's say black plays this move b4, we go knight to a4, and our opponent decides to capture this pawn on e4. What I want you to do is pause the video and try to create a huge attack in this position for the white pieces, and try to come up with ideas in order to attack this king right here. Mind you, we're not attacking it on this move specifically, we're trying to create an attack based on the fact that this king is in the center of the board and it is struggling to get out. So pause the video and try to create an attack. I will give you 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. The correct move in this position, actually there are 2 correct moves, but one of the ideas is to go knight to b6 and then take this bishop on c8. By taking this bishop on c8, you are removing the defender of the light squares. Now what you want to do is actually use the fact that you just traded off the bishop, and you want to create pressure with your own light square bishop. You want to pressure e6, so you play this move pawn to f5. Now the most natural move here for your opponent is to castle the king away and finally get out of the center, because if you still stay in the center, it's very, very dangerous. Let's say you play this move e5. What's going to happen here is that queen to g4 g4 is going to be played. Now, how are you protecting the knight and the pawn at the same time? You're not really going to be able to protect it. If the bishop is captured, you take the knight. Now this king cannot castle at all because the e-file is open. So we're combining multiple different ideas here. Queen to g4, attacking g7, also attacking the knight. After queen g4, the bishop is taken. Now the e-file is open, the king cannot castle. And this position is completely lost for the black pieces. There's not much you can do. There are actually a lot of attacking ideas here, so I would actually recommend going to the description and clicking the link there, because there's a link to the study and analyzing this position as much as possible, because you're going to learn a lot when it comes to attacking. So going back here, there are multiple different ideas. Let's say black castles here, gets out of the center. It still doesn't help, because after takes, we can still go queen g4, threatening checkmate, threatening e6, which would win the queen on c8, and this is just a losing position for the black pieces. So this is just a very, very devastating position for black, and there's not much he can do. He has to either castle and lose the game fairly quickly, or he has to do something else. In this position, the only move is to play f5, by the way. It's not even to take back, it's to play f5 and disallow queen g4, which is crazy. But of course, in this position, we still have queen h5, we still have an attack, so this is not over by any means. This is a very dangerous position, and white is still much better here.